What's up, YouTube? Welcome back to Celio's Network for the first meta discussion in a while, and this is going to be the first time we are discussing an online meta for an online tournament. So we're going to be talking about Rebel Clash standard format kind of in general, but we're going to be also specifically targeting the forecasted meta for the Limitless Invitational, or the Limitless Online Tournament Series qualifier number 3. If you haven't already signed up for that, head on over to limitlesstcg.com for more information on that. Before I introduce my guests who are here tonight to talk about the meta for Q3 with me, quick shout out to potownstore.com, my sponsor and the best place for you to get ptcgo codes. Use code CELIO for 5% off. And I'd also like to mention my Patreon, patreon.com/Celio's Network, where you can support me monthly and get some great benefits like premium articles and early deck lists. So tonight I have with me Bart and Jay. Why don't you guys introduce yourselves in that order?
My name is Bart Musser. I play out of Dallas, Texas. I started playing right after 2017 Worlds, and I played in the first 2 qualifiers. I got 10th place at the first one, didn't do so well at the second, and I'll be playing in the third this weekend.
Cool. And Jay?
Yo, what's up, guys? It's Jay Lesage. Currently playing any online tournament I can get my hands on. Playing out of Ottawa, Ontario, Canada. I came like 34th in the first one, and then I came 18th in the second, so I hit 2 bubbles, but 2-day twos ain't too shabby, and I'm gunning for a top 8 this third one.
Awesome. So are you both doing pretty well in terms of the Limitless points going towards the Invitational?
Not as well as I'd hope.
I think I'm in like 14th, something like that.
So not too bad at all. I wanted to start it off. I'm going to ask Bart, tell me how you think the Sword and Shield meta ended. So the Ultra Prism through Sword and Shield, which the first 2 qualifiers were played in. How do you think that standard format looked after we were all done playing it?
Sure. So I think the major thing in the Sword and Shield format was that you had adpz, zacian, and mill decks like competing for who could tech more against the other. You know, because you had like adpz, zacian sticking like Guru, Cryogonal, 4 Marnies, 8 catchers to try to counter themselves against Mill, and then you had Mill sticking 4 Yellgrunts, Persian, another thing, and the Sleep Engine to try to help themselves against adpz, zacian. And this ended up causing like both decks to remove consistency. And we saw like other like less, or maybe considered less consistent decks like Mewtwo, Malamar, and Ability Zard that relied more on raw power, capitalize on the fact that the format as itself was getting less consistent due to this war between like, you know, like the best, most consistent decks losing consistency to try to counter the other. So I think it kind of ended where every deck like had a bunch of draw problems, and the format like lost a lot of its like raw power and raw consistency due to every deck just trying to tech heavy for like specific things.
Do you think there was a definitive best deck?
I think adpz, zacian, and Mill like were tied for like the best decks and like the decks you had to beat going into that tournament in order to do well.
Okay, Jay, what do you think about that for Ultra Prism through Sword and Shield?
I think Bart pretty much nailed everything down to a T. However, I will disagree that I think that ADP was better than Mill overall. In terms of it, I mean, going head to head, I mean, it's pretty close. Like if you have both decks teched out for each other, it's a very grindy game. But it always felt like if ADP played the 8 catchers, they could come on top of Mill most of the time, regardless of whether or not that was the Sleep variant or the just Chinchino Mill variant. So overall, I just felt like ADP had a chokehold on the format. I wish that there was more counterplay, but I mean, I definitely think that Sleep Mill was slept on towards the end as Bart executed in his first run along with quite a few other players. But overall, definitely ADP takes the cake.
Yeah, I agree with that actually. Like everything Mill was doing, like changes to the list and developments were like either for the most part to beat adpz, zacian, and sometimes for the mirror, like changes to the list were to adapt to how powerful ADP was getting. And in the end, it just kind of showed that like the new ADP list with all the 8 catchers, as you mentioned, was like that was what came out on top of Mill, and like it was too much for Mill to deal with.
Yeah, and if you weren't playing the 8 catchers, your lists were behind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, so we kind of ended with ADPZ and Mill at the top, and everything else kind of battling it out underneath that tier S or tier 1, whatever you want to call it. So Jay, let's move on over to Ultra Prism through Rebel Clash, which is technically legal, I guess, this Friday, and will be playing. It'll be played for the first major on Saturday. What do you think it's looking like? So not necessarily just compared to Ultra Prism Sword and Shield, but as its own format. What do you think the top decks are looking like? What do you think is popular? What do you think is strong but not popular? Any thoughts?
See, in contrast to the initial question of the previous set and format, I feel like that's such an easier question for Bard Night as opposed to this one, because this one's kind of a mixed bag. So I find this format to be really interesting. We just concluded last weekend's events, and Pikarom literally stormed everything. Do I think this is accurate? Yeah, it's pretty accurate. I mean, my roommate and I were chatting about this, and he's like, "Do you really think that Pikarom is just gonna storm everything?" And I'm like, "Well, if it wasn't the most played deck and it managed to win 4 or something out of the 6 events, I'm like, people are gonna definitely declare it tier 1."
Mhm.
So I expect majority to be Pikarom right now. Dragapole is definitely tier 1.5 minimum. I find that Dragapole is losing most of its game due to whiffing energy, which alludes to me thinking that the best optimal list needs to play Energy Spinner. And also, it loses to really speedy decks, like if a Pikarom's able to get a quick hit in, or if it benches too much against ADP. This format's interesting because I feel Mill officially died. I was a huge Sleep Mill fanboy going to this start of this format because I thought it was going to be so good with one Sky Pillar to Lusamine back, but it feels like garbage. There's too many outs. Your opponent now has a VMAX to evolve. They now have an Escape Board. They now have Malolana. They now have Scoop Up Net to bring up the Mewtwo to play back the Malolana. They have all these ridiculous things, and you just get wrecked. Your opponent will draw too many prizes. So Mill, it feels like it fell by the wayside. It's now a tier 2 to 2.5. I'd almost push it as. It has really good matchups, but sometimes just gets steamrolled. I think if we're looking at top decks, Pikarom is tier 1 along with ADP still, and then we're gonna go Pikarom. Or sorry, not Pikarom. Dragapult would be the third best of those 3, but that list could be optimized to be amongst the tier 1s, and then you're going to have like weird welder decks like Cinderace and Firebox that also probably fall in tier 2. That's kind of how I feel in rough standards. I'll flat disclaimer before we pass this to Bart. I feel like this new format's kind of a crapshoot. It feels really bad playing Pokemon right now. It's kind of like if you hit it, you hit it, and if you whiff it, you just lose the game. So that's kind of my take on it.
There's a lot of things to pick apart for Rebel Clash, and a lot of things that I can pick like anything you said there. We can go on and talk more about it. I feel. The one deck I didn't hear you mention really was Baby Cephalon, unless I missed it. I've been having that in my tier 1. What do you think about that?
So I completely agree. I completely stepped over that deck, and there's a good reason for it. So I love that deck. Like I'd marry the deck, but I hate it, so I divorce it. It's basically I feel like it is the definitive best deck in format, but it can't draw consistently enough to get there.
Yeah.
On paper, it's completely good because the thing is the format has actually slowed down. Mm-hmm. Which we find people playing increased counts of energy disruptive cards, right? Like Clefable, Wait and See Hammer, Giratina, Team Yellgrunt. However, and most importantly, Reset Stamp, which is such a huge card right now. That's so big. But Baby Cephalon just doesn't get there all the time. It's good because it can capitalize on the slower decks, but it can also be slowed down by the same cards. So it's in my tier 1 as well, but only when it draws well enough.
Yeah, I have it as the very last deck of my tier 1. And up until recently, I didn't have Pikarom in my tier 1. I had Pikarom as like number 5 overall, and it was the second best in tier 2, I think. So I kind of had my best as ADPZ and Draga tied for top 2, Baby Blounds is 3rd, then ADP, Tomb, and Pika as 4th and 5th. Because I just didn't think Pika... I think it was because of an internal testing thing. I was testing with and against Pika lists that were still using Jirachis, and that's a big problem versus Dragapult decks. And I've since switched to a tag call variant that does not play Jirachis after I lost to it in the Sunday Open tournament this past weekend. And I've been working with a list more similar to that, and now Pika has actually been impressing me ever since I took the Jirachis out of the deck. Bart, what do you think about Rebel Clash? What do you think about what Jay had to say?
Okay, I'll start with Mill, because that was like my main thing of last format. Mill sucks, and it like doesn't beat anything anymore. especially Sleep Mill. Like Sleep Mill has no shot. Like one of your only, or like some of your like best matchups, like Pikarom and Baby Blounds now play like Mallow and Lanas, like you said with the tag call version for Pikarom, and Baby Blounds now plays like Scoop Up Nets, and so all those cards like make that deck absolutely unviable. Like yeah, that deck's really bad now. I think putting it at tier 2 would be very generous, because you lose all your good matchups due to like new cards that have been printed, and then you gain a ton of bad matchups. Like Dragapult is really hard for Mill to deal with. I think if you have to play Mill, like if just for some reason, I think Cincino is like your best shot, because Sleep just isn't very good anymore. But I don't even think Cincino's that good. I think for like decks that aim to deck your opponent out, I think like some of the control decks with like Galarmine and Boss's Order, like that's I guess like a little bit better than regular Mill, like Cincino Control, like we saw from the first qualifier. I think that's a little bit better than Mill is now, because it gained Galarmine and Boss's Order. But I think those archetypes as a whole took a major step back from the printing of things like Dragapult, and how ADPZ lists changed from last format, and how that'll probably be reflected into this format with like an awareness to that Mill and control decks can beat ADP if not properly tech for. Yeah, you're talking about Pikarom. I definitely agree that the tag call version is probably a lot better, because Jirachi's a big liability against things like Dragapult. I personally don't like Pikarom very much. I feel like it's very, I never like really set up what I need to whenever I play it, but I think that's just me. It's a personal like preference of the deck, but I definitely would also put it at tier 1, like one of the top decks for this format. ADP Zacian, I'd also include that on tier 1 because of its raw power with Altered Creation and Brave Blade to be able to tackle a bunch of things. I think I'd put Dragapult at tier 1, because Dragapult has a lot of just being able to spread 5 on the bench, and 130 every turn is super duper good. I agree with Jay and what he's saying about the deck can whiff energy a lot, because your attack takes 2 energy, and you have to like you have to get them early on in order to start applying pressure, and if not, you can get outsped by things like Pikarom and ADP Zacian. So I definitely agree with that. Getting into like tier 1.5 and tier 2, I definitely think ADP Spiritomb is at tier 1.5. Mm-hmm. Scoop Up Nets made that deck a lot better, and I definitely think it gets a leg up in this format, especially because Dragapult is weak to Spiritomb, and you have a much better Dragapult matchup than ADP Zacian does. And for tier 2, I would honestly, I think I would put Toxicity at tier 2. I think Toxicity is actually a pretty good deck. The only problem is that your attack takes 3 energy, and it's kind of hard to power up. I tested a little bit with Toxicity, and the only issue is when you didn't set up your 3 energy attack. But the main appealing aspect of the deck is that you hit super high numbers really easily with poison and electro powers, and I think that's why it deserves tier 2. I would honestly put Baby Blounds at tier 2, because I think it has a very tough time dealing with Dragapult when they play things like Giant Bomb and Big Charm and Horror Energy, which can one-shot a Baby Blound even if you try to attack it. I think that matchup's really hard for Baby Blounds to deal with, and I think Baby Blounds as a deck is extremely inconsistent, and I feel that it's really hard for it to set up its big knockout turns, especially when given pressure from things like Marnie and Reset Stamp, which a majority of decks are playing. I don't know if there's anything that I left out, but that's everything that comes to mind. Yeah.
Yeah, so I want to touch on Reset Stamp. So we've had these formats, or even like this month and then next month, kind of periods of time where Reset Stamp has either been a good card or has been heavily played, or has kind of lost its value and hasn't been played so much. And in UPR through Sword and Shield, Reset Stamp was kind of at an all-time low since it came out. And Jay mentioned it, and I actually noticed it through playing the Sunday Open. I'll reference that again just because like I played the Sunday Open to get in a massive amount of games against other meta archetypes to practice for this upcoming weekend of Q3, and there were so many points where I was like, yeah, if my opponent was playing a reset stamp here, I'm probably done for. Or if I was playing a reset stamp, I could seal the game here. And just noticing that with Jirachi being less played because of Dragapult, you don't have that recovery option. Just like go reset stamp knockout, your opponent usually would just go, oh, Jirachi for the supporter, and reset stamp doesn't affect me. But reset stamp does feel very strong right now. Do you guys think it's going into, if not all decks, then at least most kinds of decks?
I can start.
Sorry, go ahead, Bart. Go ahead.
Okay, so I don't think it's worth it in all decks. I think it's worth it in I think it's definitely worth it in Pikarom decks, just because of the fact that it's much easier for decks like that to find it through things like Volkner, Stellar Wish if you're still playing it even. And I think it's very important for Pikarom to have that extra hand disruption. One of the things that me and my testing group does is we'll like test on ladder and like stream the matches, and as they're playing Pikarom, I don't like play Pikarom very much, but the one thing I'm noticing is that like 90% of the games they win, they have to like reset stamp on a turn, and their opponent has to whiff something in order to take the game, but they'll take the game next turn with a tag pull, especially against things like Dragapult or adpz Zacian. Yeah, because those decks are very prone to whiffing things, and reset stamp is like a really decisive card for Pikarom in most of its matchups. Yeah, it's really important in Pikarom especially. I don't know, especially if there's many other decks that need to play like more than 2 reset stamps, but I think as a 1 of or possibly even a 2 of in some decks, it can definitely be very very impactful.
What do you think about Stamp, Jay?
Oh, I love Stamp. I love me some Stamp, Luke. It's feels so good when you play it down. You watch your opponent tremble. No, but I think it's really good. It feels like you rob the game when you play it to win, and that's what makes it so satisfying. But the thing about Stamp that I find interesting right now is that it's such a great time to be alive for Stamp. Like there's 3 prizers, there's 2 prizers, there's 1 prize. Well, now there's even 4 prizers with ADP, right? I mean, there's just so many prize combinations that if you're able to really toggle between your attackers and what they're worth, you're really able to maximize your Stamp value. So it's really good right now in a format that's so reliant on draw and combo pieces.
And like Bart was saying, Pikarom uses Stamp really well, and like you're saying, the prize combinations. Pikarom is very good at forcing a tag team and then a Bolt Ton and then another tag team, or a Zeraora or a Tapu Koko V and then another tag team, and making your opponent go down to the single prize, which is great for Stamp.
Exactly.
Back to Baby Blounds a bit. I'm not really a Baby Blounds fan myself. I'm also not a Pika fan myself, really. So good thing we're talking about these 2 decks, and none of us seem to like them too much. But I do think Baby Blounds is the most consistent it's ever been now because of the Scoop Up Net engine. Because it can go Scoop Up Net the Mewtwo, Mind Report the Welder onto the top, draw it with the Oricorio GX, and now you have your guaranteed Welder. I do think it's in a really good place because of that, and I also think it's in a really good place because it's losing its worst matchups in the entire meta. So Mill's gone now, and even if it's not, you can realistically beat it with Scoop Up Net Mewtwo Boss's Order Gust, or just Scoop Up Net to get your sleeping thing out of the active. And Spell Tag Malamar is seemingly dead. I don't think anyone's playing Spell Tag Malamar right now. Which was one of Baby Blound's other worst matchups. So I think it gained things both intrinsically in the deck and extrinsically as its matchups getting better. Another thing you talked about, Bart, was Toxicity. I think it was Bart that mentioned Toxicity. And that was actually one of the questions from Twitter here. So is the Toxicity Koga's version, Koga's Trap version viable? Is it competitively viable?
No, they have to what's it called? You have to play like draw supporters every turn. Like the deck is already like extremely inconsistent. If you're playing Kogas over draw supporters, like if you're playing Kogas instead of researching, like you're not finding electro powers, you're not finding energy. So no.
Mm-hmm. So you're playing it with Garbodor then.
Mm-hmm.
And do you play one Koga in the Garbodor version or no?
No.
Go ahead, Jay.
Like to piggyback off that, I think I'm also on the same wave as Bart, but the biggest thing that deters me from the Koga's Trap version is that you cannot play a boss's order in the same turn. So like you'll never be able to hit that high number in boss's order in the same turn. Garbodor opens windows, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that too. In that scenario, you can just get put into situations. If you're playing Koga's Trap, you can just get put into situations where you have a 3 prize during the active, and then you're hitting something for 240, but you're hitting something for 240 that doesn't net you anywhere in the game.
Yeah. So like we were saying, Toxicity's appeal is it just hits a big number in the active, right? It doesn't really have tactical strategies you can go about like the other decks like Dragapult does. It's really like, hope there's something in the active that you need to do damage to, and now you can just kill it. So you want to be digging for your electro powers. You want to be digging for your last energy attachment you need. So I definitely don't want to be playing Koga's Trap as my supporter for the turn. I would agree with that. Another question is, how good is Mill? Now, I know we've already talked about Mill, and we're coming to the conclusion that Mill probably isn't that great. But I do want to just kind of remind us all of a couple things. So this is going to be a 1,000 plus person tournament. Not everybody is playing the most updated list. Not everybody's playing the newest archetypes. Not everybody is mindful of the new archetypes and everything like that. So I do think there are still going to be decks that Mill can beat, and I personally expect to see Mill decks make it into day 2 and not to completely fall off. I expect them to still take up a sizable chunk of the metagame. Do you think, even if you don't think Mill's good, Jay, do you still think it will be played?
If Mill wins the tournament, I'll saw my arm off. No, I'm just kidding. but yes, I think it's gonna be played. It's gonna be, now I'm gonna have a bunch of people tweeting at me being like, "Oh, Jay's gonna saw it off." No, but like being a realist here, it's gonna make day 2. I've seen worse make day 2. I've seen way worse make day 2. Mill fell off, but it's still able to score wins. It can still beat things like, you can still beat outdated ADP lists. You can still beat what else? Help me out here, Bart. I'm trying to think of what Mill beats.
I think you beat Pikarom.
Pikarom, yeah.
Yeah, you probably beat Pickles. You probably beat Pikarom. Yeah.
And you beat Toxicity too.
Sure, yeah, that deck too.
All of the new VMAX decks just crumble to Mill. Inteleon, Cinderace, not Rillaboom because that deck already naturally countered Mill, but but yeah, there's still a lot in the field you can just beat because you're Mill and they don't have a counter for you.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Just because, like, I see this every single set. The community will put a blanket statement on something. Oh, X deck is dead. And then it comes back in top 8's a tournament, and everybody's like, but this content creator said the deck was dead. And, like, the deck was just one of the best decks in format 2 weeks ago. So it doesn't just go from being there to completely off the map. Which is why I dropped it down to tier 2 to see, we'll see how it goes this upcoming weekend. Maybe we'll be dropping it down to tier 3. Maybe it'll just stick around in tier 2 because it has some okay finishes. But I just wanted to talk about that. Go ahead, Bart.
So I was gonna say I agree with that. I think I don't know how like matchup spread wise it'd be put in tier 2, but I agree that it'll probably be played. And like what Jay was saying, there was definitely much worse things. There's definitely been much worse things in day 2 before. So that, a Mill player can hit 9 good matchups and make day 2. And I certainly expect that happening to at least one person.
Like my freaking girlfriend played Lapras and day 2'd the first one. Like, I mean, dreams can come true, man.
Hey, Lapras can just, get 9 energy and steamroll a couple times.
There was a certain time before qualifier 2 where I was like, let's all play Lapras because it's like beat Mill.
It's Lapras. Get in there,
Let's see some other questions. Someone said it seems like there's little buzz online about fire decks. I'm just not going to include baby Blounds in this because I feel like fire decks and baby Blounds are 2 separate things. Are fire decks being underhyped right now? So let's say Firebox. Are they being underhyped, or do they have the appropriate amount of small hype surrounding them?
You know, Firebox is interesting right now. I think Firebox takes the L to Pikarom, but I think it actually has a positive ADP matchup now that they don't play Frying Pans. And I think it has a positive Dragapult matchup, which is actually interesting because a lot of people disagree. But if you go Victini V and you spread flames and drop energy onto a Heatran and get it turned to Hot Burn GX for 350 onto a Dragapult, you probably won the game. So, I mean, provided you can consistently pull that off around 60 to 70% of the time, I mean, your matchup is looking pretty good against those decks. ADPization is not a win by any means, but it's favored for Firebox now. They've cut Frying Pans. But yeah, I think that it's okay. I mean, it can take out all the mill, which is going to be great. I mean, Firebox is naturally inconsistent. Cinderace seems like it's an interesting choice for this event as well. I know some people have been testing that with lots of healing cards. I think it's okay. I think it's received the appropriate amount of hype.
Cool. How about you, Bart? Any other thoughts? And if not, what do you think about Cinderace?
I think well, I guess I don't know if they're playing Reshizard anymore, but I think Firebox it's still a good deck. It does the same thing it did in last format, you draw while you win, and you donate, you lose.
Too.
Yeah, I guess you get like more consistency, but I think a lot of things also gain consistency. But like, even though you have the added consistency, it's still like you can draw like a Victini V and 7 fire energies and lose the game on that turn. Like that still happens to the deck. Cinderace, I don't think is very good at all. Like I read the card for the first time like 3 days ago, and I still don't understand like why people are playing it. I don't think the deck's very good.
I think Cinderace, now don't quote me and say that I think Cinderace VMAX is as good as Dragapult VMAX, because I certainly do not think that. But Dragapult VMAX, I think, suffered a similar phenomena a bit, where people saw the card and thought it was a cool spread card that could be good, but didn't really think it was like S tier broken status. Until we started seeing decks that were built around this card that actually were very, very strong. Just because the card itself in a vacuum doesn't look broken by any means. So I think it's a slightly similar thing with Cinderace VMAX, where the card doesn't look insane, but the way you can build the deck around it. One list I've really liked is Trainer Chips with Hyper Potions and Malolanas. If you can just try to keep one Cinderace alive the whole time, and it lends itself to that kind of build because it has Welder and it has the counter attack that kind of just all the pieces connect to build a deck like that for Cinderace VMAX, I do think it has potential. Now, that being said, I think its main flaw is that ADPZ can go Boss's Order twice on your support Pokemon, and they never even have to touch a Cinderace. That's the main issue with that deck. And also with Caparajah VMAX, pretty much with any VMAX that your plan is to tank with the Pokemon, the problem is, well, ADPZ can just Gust twice, and it doesn't matter how big your active Pokemon was. But my tangent on Cinderace VMAX aside, I would tend to agree with you guys, Bart and Jay, that I think Firebox is a solid like middle deck. Like it did win qualifier 2, correct? Firebox did win qualifier 2. And I don't think that necessarily grants it instant tier 1 status or anything like that. I think it's a deck that if it draws perfectly every game, that's insane, and the deck is very strong, but you can't necessarily go in expecting to draw very, very well every game with a deck like that, at least in my opinion, and it sounds like you guys would tend to agree with that as well.
Yeah, another issue with Firebox is that it lost, or like probably one of the major reasons it won, is that it lost its infinitely best matchup in Mill, and that's going to be much underplayed. And like one of the merits for Firebox was its extremely favored Mill matchup, and so it lost that, which isn't great for the deck.
Let's move on to Zacian variants that are not ADP. So the Speed Zacian, or the Jirachi Prism, Mr. Mime from Detective Pikachu, you should all know what I'm talking about by now, that Zacian, and also Lucario Melmetal Zacian. Is there any merit to either of those over ADP, because going into Rebel Clash testing, I heard people saying that, well, ADPZ is actually a little bit slow, let's just play Jirachi Prism now and take our extra prizes that way. Jay, what do you think about the other Zacian variants?
Bro, I'm gonna be real. I don't even own a Jirachi Prism online. I have not touched this deck yet. I kind of want to. It looks juicy. I mean, okay, so like I hit the treadmill like 7 times a week. Boy's trying to lose some weight, and I watch a lot of Azul. Okay, like a lot. Okay, gotta get my jog on, and I watch him take 6 prizes. Okay, and like I'm watching this guy play Jirachi Prism Zacian, and it seems like a meme in a nutshell. It's okay. I played against it a few times online. I'm not overly impressed. I'll put it in tier 2. I know a lot of people are kind of hyped on it because it has the ability to get tag team like knockouts. Like it can knock a tag team out and get the 4th prize off the Jirachi and then just kill it to Dene and the game's over. But it just puts a lot of eggs in one basket. You can only play 4 metal saucer in a game.
Yeah, that's a big thing.
Yeah, so if you can just get through that first Zacian, it feels really hard for them to win. That's pretty much my take on it. Zacian Metal is always going to be a nice 1.5 deck. Firebox is going to decrease due to what Bart was talking about because Mill decreased in play, which means Zacian Metal actually moves up the ladder a bit. I feel like it's usually a tier 1.5 deck, though.
Yeah, I think Zacian Luke Metal moves up a bit because Mill is gone, and then it moves up a little bit because Firebox might be declining because Mill is gone. But then the other issue is Baby Blounds might be increasing.
Might increase drastically.
So we'll take the one bad matchup of Baby Blounds and hope to just dodge the people still playing Mill. And Lucario Mill Metal Zacian is a favorite of mine, so I've been definitely giving it some thought. And if you're playing against a Dragapult list that does not have energy acceleration, namely Malamar, and every now and then a bead will pop out of a Dragapult list, but if you're playing against a Dragapult list that doesn't have energy excel, they have their 2 energy Dragapult in the active, and you full metal wall it, you've just bought yourself a couple turns, you have damage reduction, you have time to hit into their Dragapult, which seems
but like also
pretty interesting.
Not to go on a side tangent, but if I'm going to take a loss to Baby Blondes, I'd just rather play Grass Box at that point. You know what I mean?
Okay, yeah, that's fair. Let's move on to Rillaboom. Here, let's move on to Grass Box. Bart, what do you think about it?
I think Rillaboom is really, really good. Like, I think it's like, there was a certain point in this week where it was like my top pick and I was actually not considering anything else. And like, it was the only thing I was testing. And I think I think Rillaboom VMAX made it a lot better. And I think it has a lot of good matchups. It takes a decent ADP Zacian matchup. It's good into Dragapult. It's good into Pikarom. But as Jay was mentioning, it takes a really bad Baby Bonds matchup. It's maneuverable. You have to set up a turn where like you have to set up a board state where you have like a Rillaboom VMAX with a big charm and a weakness guard energy. But that matchup either way, it's just kind of hard to deal with, especially with the extra consistency boost. Because in past formats, decks like Me Welder and Ability Zard had like the idea that just Baby Blounds bricks like 30% of the games. Like I'll just go into this format thinking they'll brick against me. But since Baby Blounds got such a consistency boost, we don't have decks that lose to Baby Blounds can't expect them to brick as much as they used to. But I definitely think Rillaboom is very good. And if you're going into the event saying I'll take a loss to Baby Blounds, I think Rillaboom is definitely the best deck for that.
Okay. Now, I've been seeing several different kinds of Rillaboom decks. So when I say Rillaboom, I'll just say that it's the stage 2. Because not necessarily every Rillaboom box deck is playing Rillaboom VMAX, I'm not sure. Some might still go with the box variant where you're playing multiple different basic attackers. So you don't have to worry about getting out of extra evolution in Rillaboom VMAX and playing the Turffield Stadium for that. But I do think Rillaboom VMAX adds a lot. And one of the reasons players might not want to play Rillaboom VMAX is because you're adding in this extra 2/2 line, you're adding in things to search out evolution, so maybe 6 slots minimum for this card, and then you're not even one-shotting everything with it. You're capping at 280. But that being said, I do still think it's very good. And personally, I would just take the loss to Baby Blounds if I was playing it. I would not even do the weakness guard energy thing, unless I wanted weakness guard for other fire matchups and I thought it actually could win those matchups. I would probably just take the L to Baby Blounds and increase my consistency for everything else.
I just
About
had to
the
Google
weakness
what
guard
a,
energy, I
what a
think weakness guard-
Rillaboom VMAX is.
Oh yeah. I think weakness guard energy is still good in the deck because your Firebox, things like Cinderace VMAX and Firebox, like those matchups become pretty decent when you play weakness guard energy in the deck, and it can actually help stop them from taking knockouts, to which you can just like Mallow and Lana and Calming Hurricane to heal yourself, and then those matchups are like your unfavorability is drastically decreased.
Okay, so it's not just for Baby Blounds. So you have these other matchups where it helps, and then maybe you can squeak out one against Baby Blounds because of it.
Yeah.
Okay, sounds reasonable. We kind of went on over to the Rillaboom decks. But Bart, did you have any differing opinions on Zacian decks?
I think the Jirachi Prison thing is okay. Like, I think it's like a decent, like, I think it's kind of a gimmick is the issue, that like it's good when you pull it off, but like switching the top card with your deck and then benching something off like taking it off the prizes is kind of a weird gimmick that, like, you know, it'll get you through some rounds, but like it's not gonna like be reliable every single time, especially when your deck has other weaknesses. Like you said, you can only play 4 Metal Saucers in a game. You can't hit a ton of energies, guaranteed to hit a ton of energies off Intrepid Sword, and you have to use like 3 interacting Pokemon in order to even set up the Jirachi Prism combo. And if you don't set that up twice, you're just a worst ADP Zacian deck, in which ADP Zacian just needs to attach twice in order to get the extra GX attack effect. So I think ADP Zacian is probably the better version of that. I think Zacian Luke Metal will still be played because it has a very devoted following. I think people who play Zacian Luke Metal just want to play that and nothing else, and like make very few changes to their list between events. I saw a lot of people just play the same Zacian Luke Metal list to both the qualifiers, just because there are people who just really like the deck, and it definitely does get a leg up in the fact that it has a very good Dragapole matchup, and yeah.
Okay, cool. Anything you want to agree or disagree with there, Jay, before we move on?
Yeah, like I keep seeing on the ladder all these ADP decks playing like I don't know if it's Amazenta or Zamazenta.
That was one of my next
Zenta.
questions. Yeah.
How do we feel about that guy? Like, I know I'm not supposed to be the interviewer here, but like,
no, go ahead, take it away.
How do we feel about this? Like, is this a good card? Like, is this a waste of a space? Like, I personally played against one Zacian, like a Luke Metal, and they played it in there, and it was scary, but I still won the game.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, have you guys found it intimidating in testing? Is it worth the spot?
I was actually going to bring this up because a friend had messaged me, is Amazenta actually good, right before we started recording, and I haven't gotten back to him yet, so here we go. I don't personally like it in Luke Metal Zacian or anything else other than ADP Zacian, just because in my ADP Zacian lists, I've been testing basically the same list for about a month or a little more now, and I play triple energy switch in the deck. And because you can ultimate ray or energy switch energy onto Zamazenta, I like it in ADPZ because you don't want to start your game out with Zamazenta. Your main goal is in Luke Metal Zacian, you're getting a Luke Metal and a Zacian. In ADP Zacian, you're getting an ADP and a Zacian because you need to Intrepid Sword and you need to get your GX attack ready. But in ADPZ, if you're playing the energy switches, you can energy switch things off from ADPZ to Zamazenta because it needs metal colorless, so you can also use the water energy for it. And after Alter Creation, it does 160, which is 2-shotting most VMAXs or several VMAXs. And it is immune to VMAXs, which can be important. I found it very good in the Dragapult matchup, and I've also found it to be good versus Inteleon when I was testing versus that. It's been helpful versus Rillaboom VMAX, but of course some of these are more fringe decks. So if you're expecting to hit multiple Dragapult VMAX decks, and you're expecting to hit maybe 1 or 2 of the more fringe VMAX cards, I personally enjoy Zamazenta, but it alone does not win the VMAX matchups. I think you also have to be playing Mallow and Lana's in your deck to be healing the damage that has been dealt elsewhere. Any thoughts, Bart?
I agree. I think it's worth it, but again, like you said, I don't think it alone wins the matchup because everything has an answer to it. Like, Rillaboom has Executor and Rowlet. Toxicity has Boltund. Dragapult can just shred. You know, nothing's gonna like solely lose to Zamazenta, and like it'll maybe wall them out for like a turn, but like you're gonna have to use Zamazenta as a way to make them take a turn off and not be chaining a knockout or like be taking a knockout on something else to establish your board. So I think it's worth it for that aspect, but I don't think it's worth it to like just say my deck can only beat VMAX decks with Zamazenta and have no other strategy. Like you need to use it in addition to other strategies for that matchup.
So Jay, after what myself and Bart said, what do you think about Zamazenta now?
I love Zamazenta. No, it seems okay. It seems fringe. It's interesting. I definitely found it the most threatening in theory in ADP because I feel like Luke Metal just wins Dragapult anyway most of the time. Like it should, but yeah, probably ADP would be the deck I'd want to see it in the most.
Cool, sounds good. So another question, I've actually got multiple questions in combination about either fighting type decks in general or specific fighting type attackers like Stonejourner ADP or single prize fighting decks, but a lot of fighting questions. I guess because people are seeing a bit of a trend with Pikarom increasing in popularity because of Speed Lightning and Boltund, and just the fact that we have 3 lightning type archetypes in the meta. We have Toxicity, we have various Boltund things going on, and then we have Pikarom. Do you think fighting type Pokemon, any of them or all in general, have a chance as a deck that's just kind of countering these lightning type decks and then also trying to do well against other things?
Do you want me to go first?
Whoever, if you have any thoughts. If you don't, that's fine.
Okay. I don't think they're very good. I mean, like we said about Mill, you can hit 9 Pikaroms and then make day 2. But I don't think that's a reliable strategy, and I don't think any fighting type deck, unless there's something I'm not thinking of, has any shot against ADP Zacian or Dragapult or any of the other major decks that aren't weak to fighting, and I guess the best fighting deck would probably be like Phalanx, I guess, but I don't think Phalanx is good at all because you never draw your energies, and you never really set up your board like you need to. But yeah, that's basically how I feel about fighting decks as a whole.
Yeah, I actually forgot about Phalanx when talking about this, but it's funny because my mom, who's a diehard Pikarom player, was like playing on ladder and hit a Phalanx. She's like, "How do I ever beat this?" I was like, "Well, you don't, but it's not beating anything but you."
Yeah, it doesn't. And I feel like Phalanx, even Phalanx can like just die to reset, stamp, tag, bolt, either way.
I mean, if someone's looking for like a fun fighting deck that's like I'll throw it in tier 2. Let's be nice today. You can play Donphan, and I mean with the sturdy ability, and you can play Last Chance Potion, and I mean you should have a really good shot against Pikarom if you take out the Garbodor against Toxicity. You should beat Toxicity.
We'll throw this in rogue status.
Throw this in rogue. This is going rogue. You should have a very solid ADP matchup. Yeah, it's an okay deck. I mean, it does 70 damage, and then when you attack again, it does 140. You can have a Diancie, but the Diancie doesn't really hit relevant numbers. So yeah, Donphan's pretty good. It's probably better than Phalanx.
Okay, we got better than Phalanx. That's a start. Here's a pretty easy one to answer. Is ADPZ still the BDIF?
Maybe.
I'm gonna say undefined.
Yeah, I agree. I'm not. I think it might be one of the most played, but I don't know about best deck.
I don't know if it's best deck. I feel like the top, like ADP and Dragapole and Pikarom are really fighting it out right now, and I can't really throw Baby Blondes in the equation. It's not consistent enough. It could very well win the tournament, but it would not be the best deck. I think it's just those big 3 decks that are really fighting it out right now.
I got a lot of questions about ADP, so I'm going to try to make them as creative as possible.
Okay, sick.
Is it possible that ADP falls out of tier 1 at some point in the Rebel Clash meta?
No.
ADPZ's sticking around for the long haul.
Yeah.
Same question, but for Dragapult. Do you think Dragapult could flop? Do you think the meta could counter it hard enough that we get into a game where Dragapult's not tier 1?
Yes.
For this tournament?
No, not just the Rebel Clash standard in general, like the next 2.5 months or whatever.
Yeah.
I don't know. Like, Bart, why do you think it could flop? I'm curious.
Well, there's a lot of things that can counter it, and there's a lot of people are going into this event just saying like, I have to beat Dragapole, which I don't even think is necessarily true. Like a lot of the fringier decks that aren't in that top 3 we've been talking about, the main merit we're giving them is, oh well, this deck beats Dragapult, and that's just kind of like the main thing that people are like playing decks, and one of the main reasons they're playing them is because they think it has a positive matchup against Dragapult. So a lot of the reasons that a lot of the deck decisions people are going to be making are decks that have a favored matchup against Dragapult.
Yeah, but I mean, it's kind of hard. Like right now, you're kind of saying like cards counter Dragapult, but I'm just like, healing and energy disruption are great cards, but they really break down the consistency of a deck, I feel. So I feel like we're going to follow a similar trend to the previous format where people will end up cutting valuable cards in their deck to play 4 Team Yell Grunt or play 2 Malolana. You know, they'll fit in things like that.
I agree with that.
While I see your merit, I think the lowest Dragapult could ever go is tier 1.5.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, and I like what Bart's saying. I see half of like both of your thoughts. So like, if people are making their decks overall worse to beat Dragapult, and they're beating the Dragapults, that still means Dragapult decks are losing. Even if these decks are going 5-5 in the tournament, they're still knocking Dragapult players out. So they're like the Dragapult hate, whether it's a good deck or not, or a deck that can actually be successful, the Dragapult hate may still be there and just pull down Dragapult with it.
Like the hate is there, but like in your hypothetical scenario where a player is going like 5-5, like you said, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, it depends when they're hitting the Dragapults. I mean,
right, yeah.
Like this is like a classic scenario where people are like trying to beat the best deck in format, quote unquote, right? Mm-hmm. Where they'll play this hardcore counter deck that's either inconsistent or doesn't have a great matchup spread, banking on playing against the best deck. But if they like in your scenario, they could have lost the first 5 games. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and then they don't even hit the deck,
and then it doesn't even matter, right? They could have went 5-0 and then went on the losing streak. So I mean, decks like that trend to do that. Like they will have impressive starts, or they'll have very deceptive starts, and then they'll start to climb up a little bit. But either way, they become irrelevant in the long run, and other Dragapults that are fiending on tier 1 matchups will rise to the top.
Sounds good. So one more kind of not really specific question, but before we get into the wrap-up questions, are there good techs you should be playing in your tier 1 decks, like filling out the 60th slot? What should you be filling out your last card in like your Pikarom, ADP, Dragapult, your meta decks that are kind of already defined? What do you put in as the last card?
Stamps, swells, and healing cards.
How about you, Jay?
I just throw a Mew in. I mean, Mew kind of licks up a lot of Pikarom's good matchups. I mean, like if you're ADP and if you just slip a Mew in, I really don't see how you're taking the L to Pikarom.
That's true for ADP. I would agree with that,
true,
actually. Yeah.
Because like Pikarom just goes into ADP knowing they don't play a Mew, right? Mm-hmm. And you're like, well, I'm taking 5 prizes because I'm knocking out an ADP and a Dedenne, and now I just have to scrounge together a knockout on the Zacian.
That's what I'm saying. Like when I enter that matchup, I'm stanced up. I got the Mew boys.
Oh, and I think Tool Scrapper is another good like 60th card if you have like.
I think you should have Tool Scrapper anyway, honestly.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. People keep on mentioning Tool Scrapper, and I'm like, I still haven't played against a single one on the ladder, and I've played probably over 200 games, and I'm scared of the Tool Scrapper hype. Like,
I think Tool Scrapper is good. Like I try to put it in my initial 60 for most decks, and then if I realize, well, I don't care if they have a big charm, we can take it out. I think the one archetype that is like almost 0% Tool Scrapper is Dragapult. I've been seeing like no Tool Scrapper in Dragapults.
Yeah.
That's just my observation though for that one.
Yeah, I don't think it's easy for a Dragapult to find a Tool Scrapper.
Yeah. Are there any decks that we did not mention that you wanted to bring up? Actually, a Mewtwo just popped into my head. Mewtwo variants, are they gone?
Yes.
I literally think about this all day, and I'm like, I'm like, are they though? I'm like, I can't tell.
I think your Dragapult matchup's horrendous.
Okay, so I will say this comes with a caveat, but the only loss I had in that Sunday Open tournament other than the finals was Mew Mally round 1, and they were playing a Jirachi GX and just night watched me, and I couldn't hit them for weakness, and I dead drew.
I mean, but how did they end up doing?
What was it?
You can go first.
Were you playing Dragapole?
Yeah.
Okay.
And my other question was like, how well did they end up doing?
Oh, probably not well, but
exactly.
I'm just saying it kind of popped it back into my mind. I was like, okay, they can play Jirachi GX. They can night watch you, Marnie, still do night watch Marnie things.
No, yeah, I realized that, but like the main issue with that deck is like the reason it was good last format is because that entire format died to Marnie Nightwatch, and now like we have a format that doesn't lose as badly to Marnie Nightwatch, and with a big like 300 HP attacker in the active with a big charm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, do you think Mewtwo variants in general just fall from competing for tier 1 to not even on the map?
I think they're on the map still. I think because Mewtwo variants take a really good Pikarom matchup, like, and you still have like the fact that you can Flare Blitz and ADP on turn 2 of the game and just like put them in a much worse position. But I think definitely they take a step back.
Okay, how about you, Jay?
I'm slowly like clicking it in my head that tier 2 is massive right now. Like there's a very large tier 2 deck pool.
I think on my tier list that I definitely left things out of on my recent article, I think tier 2 might have been 8 archetypes, and then tier 3 had a lot more, because tier 2 is kind of like the decks from last format's tier 2 plus the waiting room. Like these decks need to still prove themselves to either go up to tier 1 or down to tier 3 or stay in tier 2, and I'm not really sure where they go yet, but they're solid. And I think we have a lot of that just because Rebel Clash did give us a good bit of viable cards that aren't like in your face insane. Like Toxicity VMAX. It's not broken, but it's viable. Cinderace VMAX, viable. Rillaboom VMAX, viable. So there's a lot to go into that. Yeah, I agree with you, Jay. So what do you think about Mewtwo?
Oh, sorry. Let me go on. Sorry. I was daydreaming about Max
good.
Phantom. Okay. Basically, Mewtwo in a nutshell. You definitely have to play Jirachi GX. Like, there's no way you get away without not playing one. I kind of thought about like a world where Mewtwo could win, but I feel like against Dragapult, they even just kill the Malamars. Like, that's just another freebie prize. Like, you can't run from that. But a deck that like kind of follows a very similar staple that I think could do well could be a straight Dusk Noir Malamar. I think that would be better than Mewtwo, considering it doesn't have the psychic weakness, so you don't even have to run the Jirachi. It has energy disruption with the GX attack, and it can Marnie Nightwatch lock people. So I think they're really good. But you can even play cards like you could play Morty. You could play anything like that. You could play juicy cards in that deck. You can play Island Amulet if you wanted to, even though it got a lot worse with Tool Scrapper now. But I think that deck could be good.
Cool. Sounds good. All right, are there any other archetypes, variants, rogue decks, whatever, that we missed before we wrap it up?
Obstagoon. I think Obstagoon's like okay.
Obstagoon. Yeah, Galarian Obstagoon. We're not talking about that card at all.
Yeah. What's it called? I played against Obstagoon round 1 of a tournament I entered in yesterday, and I was playing Rillaboom, and the matchup was much closer than I expected it to be. Like, I was on, because I play like the 2-2 VMAX line, so I was honestly shocked at how close he got, just because of how strong because like against 3-prize decks, being able to go Doom Count and then Crazy Claws just to take like 6 prizes naturally like that, like they have that option. Now, whether you pull that off consistently is a little difficult, but I definitely think that since the deck can do that, and since you also have the other ability to just go Lone Obstagoon, you can do that much easier with Scoop Up Nets now. I think the deck actually got a lot better, but I don't know if that actually elevates it to be like good enough to consider playing for the event.
Okay, yeah, so maybe not count it out, because it's been nowhere. It has not been talked about at all from what I've been seeing. So maybe it deserves a little more recognition.
Yeah.
Any other decks from you, Jay?
Okay, a little wild card here. What do you guys think of straight Macargo GX? So like, it can hit numbers.
Macargo?
Pardon?
What did you say before Macargo?
Like
straight
attack
Macargo
Straight
GX.
Macargo GX?
Like, I could see this being juicy with like the Volcanion, where if you go second, attach 3 energies, or Victini V, either one, slam a bunch of energy on a cargo and just ram through 2 tag teams.
I think it's hard to set up a Pokemon when after Boss's Order was printed. It's hard to like get a Macargo that can have enough energy to deal with the like that has enough energy to deal with things that have like 330, 340 HP. And because of Boss's Orders, they can bring it up before you actually get enough energy on it. And even if you do it once, it's kind of difficult to do that twice. So I don't know if it's incredibly viable.
I think you might want to run Sky Pillar if you were doing that because of Dragapult. Like, so if you go second, they're starting to spread damage around. Even if you don't go second, it doesn't really matter. They can be picking off your stage 1 Mycargos that you need to sustain throughout the game. Not your stage, they're all stage 1. The non-GX Mycargos that you need to sustain throughout the game. Just kind of thinking about it in theory right now, since I forgot to practice with Mycargo GX before this video, but I think it would struggle versus Dragapults that are keeping the full 3 giant bombs in their deck. Unless you played multiple Tool Scrappers in your Mycargo GX deck, because they just hit you for 130 once and then Giant Bomb finishes you off, right? I think Mycargo has 200 HP.
210.
Yeah, okay, so one hit and then Giant Bomb finishes you off, which it doesn't do to a lot of other attackers in the format. So I think that could also be a really big issue.
Yeah, pretty much. Okay.
I think
it could still work. It could still be viable, but it's probably not the best choice.
Yeah, I think if anything, Cephalon GX is a little better than Macargo just because you have access to Stinger in such a 3-prize format. I don't think Cephalon is necessarily like very good, but I think just having access to like Stinger Mind Blown and not playing any 3-prizers, like I think Cephalon is the best deck for that.
Man, we're throwing around so many like decks I haven't even thought about, and I'm just like, oh my god.
We only have 2 days to think about them now. All right, so before we wrap things up, I want to give a couple little questions that we always do for the meta discussions. So, what do you think the most popular decks are going to be? Now, personally, talking about the qualifiers, I've just kind of liked talking about like what decks do you think are going to make up the top 50% of the meta population. But you can do that, or you can say the top 5 most popular decks, just because in the amount of rounds we play in these tournaments, you hit a lot of decks. You hit a lot of different decks. So, Bart, we'll start with you. What do you think the most popular decks are going to be, or like what decks do you think you could guarantee you're hitting at least one of? However you want to answer it.
Okay, so I think Pikarom and adpz Zacian will be huge because not only do people already have the cards for that, but they're also still very good decks. I don't really know besides those two, because another major thing is I do not think Dragapult will be heavily played at all. And the major thing with that is that Dragapult right now, in order to build the deck, is like 130 packs. And with the price of Rebel Clash codes, you're looking at spending like $150 for one deck, where the prizes that you'll win from that event are like just like go slightly over $150. So a lot of people will probably not even see it's worth it to buy the packs and codes for Dragapults, and even then, like even if you can like get the codes for Dragapults, like there's very few trades actually out for Dragapults for people that actually want to get rid of them. So I think Dragapult will actually be very lowly played compared to like Pikarom and ADP Zacian, just due to the fact of how hard they are to get and how expensive they are. I think Baby Blounce will be heavily played because Baby Blounce is like a cheap deck for people who like don't have all the cards online, which like in a 1,000-person tournament, you know, there's a decent amount of people who don't have like really expensive cards online. And also just being a one-prize deck, that's really appealing to some people. So I think the top 3 most played decks will be like ADP Zacian, Pikarom, and Baby Blounce, probably in that order.
Cool. How about you, Jay?
I agree with ADP Zacian and Pikarom being the top 2 most played deck. I'm going to counter back a little bit. I think that Dragapult will actually see play just because people right now aren't investing money into travel or fees. And right now, in terms of keeping Pokemon alive in their households, right? Like they would probably not mind as much investing codes, like money into codes as opposed to physical product. So I could still, I could see a small drop off in some casual players who are entering the tournament who might have wanted to play Dragapult, but are now playing another deck. However, I still think it's going to be the percentage of Dragapult will be more than Baby Blounce going to the tournament. But in my order, it's just slightly different from Bart's. It would go Pikarom first, ADP, then Dragapult, and then Baby Blounce.
Sounds good. And if you had 3 top picks, 3 choices that you think were most likely to perform well in the tournament, not even necessarily the decks you might play, but the decks you think are most likely to perform well in the tournament, what would those be, Jay? They can be the same as your most popular, but
yeah, the thing is that they aren't though.
Okay, go for it.
Which is interesting. I think Dragapult has too big of a target on its back, even though I love it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm gonna put Dragapult as my 3rd. I'm gonna throw Rillaboom in the top 3, and I'll throw ADP in there too. I think Pikarom. So I think in ADP 1, Rillaboom 2, Dragapult 3, Pikarom would have been my 4th, and I think that's just because ADP is just solid. As long as you're playing a Mew, you should be fine against all the Pikarom decks, and you can just play speedy/smart against a Dragapult player. Rillaboom's in 2nd. Just being able to remove energy off your opponent's field is nuts. Like you can apply that similar concept to a Frostmoth deck with a Palkia GX, though, depending on the metagame.
Yeah.
But right now, like I said earlier, the metagame is just so slow. It's just shifted to like 1 energy a turn, or attaching multiple energy per turn, but like based on item cards that are just 1 uses, right? So if you can just get past that and wipe their energy off the field, you should be able to draw your 6 prizes just fine. And then lastly, Dragapult, I think is just overwhelmingly strong. I think some people aren't even ready for it. As long as the list is optimized, like I was saying, like you definitely need Energy Spinner. That is no cap. I'm not even kidding. If you don't play Energy Spinner, you're probably going to whiff multiple energies throughout a 14-round tournament, potentially a 21-round tournament, 20-round tournament, 20-round tournament.
Yeah,
and
I
even
strongly
more
agree with the
Energy
Energy Spinner.
I favor actually. I know a lot of people are going to Yoneda's list, but I actually favor the runner-up list, which was played by. I'm drawing the biggest blank. How am I drawing this blank right now?
Shintaro.
Thank you so much. I was about to say, I like Shintaro. Shintaro's list is much better. He played 4 spinner, and I believe he omitted Jirachi in favor of just playing 2 prize GX Pokemon.
He may have. I covered both of the lists on this channel, so they're here somewhere if you want to see the lists after this video.
Yeah.
Anyone watching. But yeah, I wouldn't go so far as to play all of those spinners, but I do think a spinner is good. I just like 1 spinner because I'm playing Jirachis, and it's basically a Jirachi-able energy. So I like that. I wouldn't go so far as to play 4 spinners, but I do like 1.
Yeah, I don't want to have like a whole show based on Dragapult, but basically, if you're not going to play Jirachi though, you might need the 4 spinner because it's really essential to just having your turn one or in the late game, like you really can't miss the energy drop with the Dragapult deck. It has no acceleration. I mean, I know we didn't touch on Malamar Dragapult at all, which I'm not a fan of that deck.
Mhm.
I think that it's unnecessary. If anything, I'd play a 1/1. But basically, Energy Spinner I think is very good as a high count if you don't run Jirachi or ways to get it. That way you can go Energy Spinner into Boss's Order and spam Boss's Order, which is key in the deck.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Cool. Bart, did we do your top decks? Decks you
No,
think will be most successful?
if we think most successful, I think our list is close. I think it'd be ADP, Rillaboom, and Baby Blounds. ADP just because it's like such a naturally powerful deck. Rillaboom for the exact same reason. I think it's I think just like the ability to remove all their energy from their board is so good. And 150 with Calming Hurricane and then 200 with Tropical Hour is really it can one-shot all the VMAXs in the format and remove all their energies in the same turn, which is really powerful against like Dragapole, and removing energies against like Pikarom and things like that is also very good. You have a very favorable Pikarom matchup, a very favorable Dragapole matchup, decent ADP Zacian matchup, and the deck can just like, it can set up, and it sets up very well. Like it executes its game strategy like probably the most common out of any other deck, because all you need is like 2 Pokemon turn 1 in order to get it off. And then for Baby Blounds, I just think that like Baby Blounds players will draw their Welders and they'll draw a bunch of energies and beat things, because that's basically how that deck wins. And yeah, that's basically why I put those 3 decks in the top 3 of being successful.
Cool. 2 things. One, you guys can't see my camera, but I was laughing because when you said execute and you're talking about a Rillaboom Eggroll deck. 2, I think a lot of people watching this video are going to be like, where have I been for all of this talk about Rillaboom? Because I agree with you guys. I do think Rillaboom has potential, but I haven't seen many people voicing opinions on that. So I'm kind of wondering if that's kind of like a low-key kind of deck, or is it just underrated? What do you think? Is it underrated, or are people just not talking about it because it is good?
It's a no leaks.
That, and people kind of go like, oh, that's Rillaboom, that card's bad. Like,
okay, it just kind of got this stigma around it.
Yeah.
I mean, the deck just bops. I mean, you just remove a ton of energy and you just bop people and you heal damage and bop people.
Yeah, it's such a chill deck.
It's so chill. Hey.
Yeah, you do like one thing the whole game and then you like heal everything.
All right, so yeah, Rillaboom might need to be on your radar for the weekend then, apparently. Bart and then Jay, why don't you give your shout outs and then we'll get out of here.
Shout out to all the boys in my Discord channel where you talk like all day long about decks and just stuff and tournaments, and they know who they are. That's basically it.
Nice. Jay?
Shout out Rillaboom VMAX.
That too, yeah, sorry, I forgot that.
Yeah, that's my homie. Shout out Zach, the homie. Shout out ptcgo store. Use code 5%. 5%. Use code J5. 5% off your Rebel Clash codes, because I know they're hella expensive, but I got the plug. Shout out all the homies. Shout out everyone who's been really supportive with definitely like me returning to playing the game. That's been really fun and really nice. So genuinely, thanks to everyone. Shout out Rudy, Wade, and Mike Morden for being the musical homies. It's been a lot of fun. Rudy's going to be having a lot of stuff drop soon, and Mike is going to drop an album sometime in his lifetime, so that's cool too. But yeah, shout out to everybody there, and shout out to you, of course, for letting us on the I was going to say podcast, but letting us on the video. It's great.
Yeah.
Word. Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you guys for being here. And thank you everybody for watching this hour and 10 minutes long meta discussion about a tournament that's not physically even happening. It's happening from all of our bedrooms and our computers. So that's really cool. The first meta discussion I've done for an online tournament. Hopefully we'll be doing this again for Q4. Hope you got some good information out of all of this. Like I said earlier in the video, I do have a Patreon if you're interested in that, and shout out to Potown Store, my sponsor. If you're interested in deck lists or gameplay of any of the decks we talked about, I have a bunch of videos on this channel because it just so happens this is a Pokemon TCG YouTube channel. I've done a lot of Dragapult Malamar stuff in the past few days just because I had so much gameplay piled up with that deck. But I hope you guys all enjoyed this video. Subscribe to the channel if you'd like to see more content like this in the future. Any links that my guests gave me will be in the description down below if you want to follow them on social medias or anything like that. And I'll see you next time here on Celio's Network.